we're focused on partnerships. So we'll try and leave most of the time for questions. There's so much, specifics around partnerships, and there's so many different ways that you can do it. So we'll try and reserve it to be a little bit more customized. But the first, half of the presentation cover two major things. So first, partnership strategy. So what kind of started this whole thing for us hosting this was we put up a blog post that was quite extensive about how to do partnerships, but left out quite a bit on, I think, what is the more important question, which is the strategy and whether you should be doing partnerships. So we'll spend a little bit more time on that. Then we'll get into some of the more tactical tips on how to actually get partnerships and what you should be looking for, what the process is. And then we'll dive into Q&A. But before we dive into that, a little bit of background on me and why you should listen to me at all for the next hour. So I am a scientist by training, so I'm not a BD person. Coming from a technical background, I did my PhD at UC Berkeley in Jennifer Doudna's lab. We then spun out a company called Mammoth Biosciences, which is focused on moving CRISPR therapies in vivo, as opposed to the way that they've been done, for many of the first programs ex vivo. As part of that, because CRISPR is, such a versatile platform, partnerships really have been core to the strategy of the business. And so we've now done partnerships that cumulatively have over $200 million in upfronts. Namely on the therapeutic side, we've done partnerships with Vertex as well as Bayer, and then most recently a deal with Regeneron, where that came with a $100 million upfront for collaborating on a number of different programs. And then historically, we've also done deals in the diagnostic space, so have some sense also of some of the differences, whether you're talking about medical device, diagnostics, or therapeutics, and partnering in those different sectors. The other thing I work on is SciFounders, which I'll tell you a little bit more about on the next slide. But spend a lot of time with our companies talking about partnership strategy and how to close partnerships. So I've seen lots of different deals through that as well. A little bit about SciFounders. So if you're not familiar with us, we are a little bit different than most kind of traditional VCs. We focus on seed or pre-seed to up to Series A sometimes, but mostly pre-seed and seed is kind of the sweet spot. And we're really built around this idea of supporting strong technical founders to be able to lead their companies into the long term. So, we tend to think that's been historically a very successful model, and has led to many of the most successful biotech companies that are out there. Is this committed leadership of people that really understand and care about the technology. The other big difference is that we're actually operators ourselves. So Matt, who's on the call, started Conception, which is making eggs out of stem cells, and then me with Mammoth. And so we're not, just kind of giving you platitudes. We really are trying to draw from our experience in those companies and try and be the investors that we would want for our own company. So this is just a brief plug, but if you have some exciting company, definitely feel free to shoot us an email, and we may end up chatting. All right. So diving in a little bit more on the partnership strategy and also just the current landscape and backdrop. So I won't go into the nuance of who you should partner with and what companies are doing deals, since again I think that's very bespoke. But we'll kind of give you a high level overview of some of the trends that we're seeing and what partnership looks like in 2025. So I think this is a bit of a somber slide, but the reality is for startups, and many of you are probably as aware as I am about this. Venture funding is definitely much harder to come by than it was in years historically, and so this is meaning that partnerships are becoming more and more critical. And as equity financings dry up, I think the bad thing is that more companies are trying to pull on partnerships, and so it's much more competitive to try and get these deals. I think the venture ecosystem is somewhat cyclical, and we expect it to rebound. But I think this is an important thing to keep in mind as you're pursuing partnerships. At the same time, investors, because they're worried about the capital markets, are really looking for ways for companies to hit clinical and commercial milestones earlier. And again, I'm sure many of you are acutely aware of this. And so this changes the dynamic a little bit in that whereas historically investors may have been reticent to give up too much of the program or give up royalties. They may now be seeing this as an important de-risking thing, so they may be more open to doing partnerships than they have been historically. So this is the bad part. The good part is that many of the pharma companies are doing quite well despite some of their market caps maybe not being as healthy. And so many pharma companies, and highlighting Lilly here for obvious reasons, but have extremely strong balance sheets and are really prioritizing partnerships as a core part of their business. Them just sitting on capital or giving out dividends is not nearly as beneficial to them as partnering with companies that will eventually enrich their pipeline. So from what we've seen, many of these pharma companies have been more aggressive, especially even in the last 6 to 12 months, about partnering and finding ways to support the sector. And I think a lot of that is that they recognize that they are dependent on the sector and the biotech companies to have these assets to be able to fuel their pipelines 5, 10 years down the line. So the more forward-looking ones are trying to get ahead of that and investing in those startups now. So a bit of a bittersweet in terms of partnerships are more challenging in some ways, but there are partnerships to be done for sure. So zooming out again a little bit on the strategy, maybe this will discourage everyone, and you can sign off after this. But I think it's important to think about why you shouldn't partner also. I think many companies, especially small companies, see upfronts that are in the millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and they really get focused on that. But I think it's really important to know and think critically about what you're giving up with a partnership. Things are not perfectly rosy when you do partnerships, and you really do need to think about these as long-term engagements. So you fundamentally are selling the future when you're doing a partnership, right? You're giving some share of a program, or you're giving the program outright to a partner to drive. And so this plot on the right is for acquisitions, but this holds also for just doing partnerships as well to some degree. But what you can see is, as you develop these programs, the value of them it increases dramatically. And so you really should be strategic about when you're partnering and when you're maximizing the value for the program that you're working on. So just looking at a preclinical asset versus a phase one, or even say an IND ready asset, you might be talking about 5 or 10-fold increase between those phases. So if you can fund to those subsequent phases and you have the expertise to be able to do that, it often makes sense to actually continue to invest internally and then partner later. The other reason you shouldn't partner is if you have one program and you have the resources to fund it, you should recognize that partners, you're bringing in new stakeholders that are maybe not perfectly aligned with what your interests are as a company. And so for those critical, often lead programs for companies, it's very important to be able to maintain control and flexibility, be able to adapt and make sure that it's actually aligned with your interests. So in those cases, it may not make sense to bring in another partner that will kind of potentially gum things up, and potentially slow things down. Also, if you have just like amazing capabilities and you think you can actually develop these, to whatever the next phase is, whether it's clinical, or even commercial, then you have to think about what you're actually getting with the partnership. But be honest with yourself, especially for startups. If you're a 10-person company, you probably are not clinical experts or commercial experts. Sorry to say, you can develop into that, but having those support functions from partners is definitely extremely valuable. So that's again why you shouldn't partner. So if you check all those boxes, you can leave the Zoom. But maybe more importantly, why you should partner. And many of you are probably aware of this, but there's some I think less focused on aspects of value of actually doing these partnerships. So obviously capital constraints, again, we've talked about upfronts. That's what everyone focuses on. And here, even though you're selling the future, I think it's important to have the mindset of it's, better to have some percent of something than have 100% of nothing. Um, the other one that I think gets maybe less recognized is market validation, especially if you're an early stage platform company. Many investors, and whether it's seed investors or Series A investors, will look at the partner that you're working with. So if you did a partner with, Lilly or Novo or Regeneron or something, they'll look at that as a stamp of approval from that company who did, incredible diligence and, scientific and both intellectual property, and look at that as validation that they who may not be the experts and may not be able to do as in-depth diligence, are able to see that you actually were, kind of verified by those groups. Capabilities we mentioned, so bringing in, especially for later stage CMC or clinical work, that can be extremely valuable. Yeah, so there's lots of reasons to partner, but the important thing is to, again, just make sure you level set and actually understand what you're getting out of the partnership and what you're giving up, maybe more importantly. For most companies, some hybrid version makes the most sense. The pure partner play, which many companies have tried to do, really has not worked for most, at least therapeutics companies. So it's not to say that it won't work, but you should have a clear reason about why those kind of historic case studies, why you're different than those. But you really end up being a CRO at some point, and you're not able to capture enough value of the program, even if you're getting royalties. There just aren't enough pharma companies like there would be for like a B2B SaaS company or something where you can do hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of partnerships. You're talking about dozens of customers on this side. So definitely my advice is to not do 100% partnership strategy. You want to maintain in this hybrid approach, you definitely want to maintain the rights to your crown jewel, and partner secondary programs. And importantly, even if you only have one, let's say, asset, so one molecule, you still can do this hybrid approach, but you just have to think more creatively about it. So it might be through geographies, so giving rights for them to commercialize it in Europe, or sub indications. So if you have a smaller indication that you as a smaller biotech can develop it for let's say 50,000 patients or something, but it also has applicability to much larger patient population, that you'd need to do a massive billion-dollar trial. It may make sense to parse it out that way. So you don't necessarily need to be a platform company that has 10 programs to be able to partner effectively. All right. And then before we dive into more of the how-to side of things, I did want to give a bit of a brief aside on partnerships in China. Obviously, this has been in a lot of the news recently. And just want to give some comments on how this is coloring the partnering landscape, especially for earlier stage biotech companies. So without a doubt, this is an emerging trend, and China is much more of a player than they were historically. I think a lot of this is driven not necessarily by kind of innovative technologies, but more even on the regulatory and policy side, that they've been able to push forward trials extremely quickly, and generate data. But it's important to recognize that most of what's been done in this space has been for kind of copycat molecules, whether it's bispecifics or small molecules, and really has not been on the more innovation side of things. So TLDR, I think if you are thinking about partnering or a little bit discouraged about, okay, I'm going to try and partner this, but they're just going to go buy it from a Chinese company. I don't think that should discourage you. I think things will continue to develop, but if you're dealing with complex products, like for us with gene editing, where you have multiple components and fairly complex drug products from a CMC standpoint, or things that are really innovative, it's unlikely that the pharma company or smaller partner that you're talking to is also talking to a Chinese company. So this is more of a just to make sure you're not discouraged by all the news on Chinese partnering. All right. So that's some of the context and backdrop. We'll now dive into a little bit more practical advice on the how-to. And some of you sent over questions, so hopefully we'll answer some of those in the section, but otherwise we'll come back to them in the Q&A section. So in this blog post, and I didn't put a link in this, but you're welcome to just find it online. But I use this marriage analogy for partnerships, and I think that's really an important thing to highlight, largely because it really is about the people and it's about long-term relationships. And that, again, going back to the earlier part, you should be thinking seriously about what you're signing up for, and making sure you're not committing to something that is not actually going to be a long-term relationship, that you're not committed to seeing to the end. So you can draw these, and I just noticed a typo on the top, but you can draw these analogies at each of the different stages, where scouting, you're doing a lot of kind of just playing the field and trying to find things online. You're going to kind of mixer events to find people. During dating, you're really just looking for that mutual interest, and that you guys are aligned on the values and what you guys are doing. Maybe a distinct thing here is that in partnering, you probably should be dating many people simultaneously. So depending on your perspective on relationships, maybe that's where the analogy falls apart. But and then for getting engaged, you get term sheets, you get a contract, you sign it, and then you have to actually do the many years of the actual marriage. So all this is really to just say, you should make sure that you are thinking about this as a long-term commitment, and thinking about more the people that are involved than just the transaction. So, to be a little bit more tactical, there really are only three things that need to happen for you to get a partnership done. And this is extremely oversimplified, and we'll get into each of these buckets in the subsequent slides. But, first, you need to have something that the partner wants. And if partnerships are going to be a core part of your strategy, you should be making sure that you're building something that the partner wants well ahead of any conversations, with them trying to sell them the thing. So if you're a platform company, making sure even that those first kind of proof of concepts that you're doing are, tackling something that's going to resonate with pharma. Next, the partner needs to know that you have something that they want. So this is more of the outreach side, and we'll talk about this on the next slide. And then you just need to align and make sure that you guys are clear on what each of you is bringing to the party. And of course, this is often where things fall apart. And so we'll talk a little bit about some tips on how to approach negotiations with other companies. All right. So again, and I'm going to continue to hammer the same point, but before you actually go out and run a partnership process, and you should think about it as a process, it shouldn't just be kind of a ad hoc thing. You should make sure that your house is in order and that you're aligned on the priorities for your partnership. So know what you're actually optimizing for. Are you trying to just get some upfront cash to make sure the company can sustain and survive? Are you desperately need capabilities to actually develop the program? What are the programs that you want to partner or sub-indications? And then from a negotiating standpoint, what are your hard lines? A very classic negotiating tactic is negotiations might last for many, many months, or even longer in some cases. And many kind of more savvy BD people will just kind of chip away at that line in your position until you don't even realize that you've crossed that line. So being very clear again before you go out to start to run your process. Make sure that you're clear on what those hard lines are. And then, be clear also on who the final decision maker and who the stakeholders are in your organization, so that, you know that you're actually solving the problem that, they're trying to solve. So if you're, an exec team, make sure that you're even documenting all of this. If you're a more junior BD person, I think it's even more important that even if it's like pulling teeth to kind of get those inputs and those criteria, that you're understanding what are the priorities for the company from your executives or from your board. But diving into partnerships without actually considering the long-term consequences can be quite damaging and can ultimately can destroy companies. So do this step. Don't skip it, even if it feels like you probably have in your head what you want out of partnerships. All right. And then how do you actually get partnerships? So break this down into kind of two buckets, or how do you get conversations with potential partners? A lot of this is very analogous to a good fundraising process. So if you guys have been part of or run fundraising processes, much of this will seem very familiar. But there's these two buckets. So inbound strategy, I would think of this more just as general marketing. This is making sure that not targeted at a specific person, that people know what you're working on and that you really are a relevant company for in the space. So conference presentations and publications are super important for this. Very often, after you do even a technical presentation, people will come up and you'll be surprised that there's lots of partners that are just doing landscaping in the audience that will reach out to you. There's a lot of these. I often call them kind of industry speed dating events. Again, you're going back to the marriage analogy, but these are things like investment banking conferences often will do this. But here you might have back-to-back meetings, with 10 or 15 minutes with different partners where they're signing up. There's some kind of platform to do it. I haven't found that these are super high yield, but definitely it's another source that you can draw on. Yeah, and then of course you'll just get inbound as well from maybe LinkedIn or your even email or if you have like a hello or info email for your company that you'll just get inbound every time someone is interested in doing something. Probably more important is the outbound strategy, and this is really what you have a lot more control of course. And so here, I think first step is really to make as comprehensive as possible the landscape of who might be interested in the programs that you're working on. So this could be this could be a couple companies. It could also be a dozen companies, but make sure that kind of who the hit list is. Next step, and this is really where you have to be pretty unashamed about leveraging your network, is to try and get the best introduction possible to whatever that group is that you're trying to target. So this can be through your board, it can be through your advisors, your network, often even people that you might have in your company that worked previously at the company might know the person to talk to. But this is in my experience, the number one way to actually have a productive and fruitful interaction is to make it a warm intro. Again, very analogous to fundraising, where if you're shooting off a bunch of cold emails, you're going to have a lower hit rate potentially than if you're really being targeted. That said, cold emails can also work. So if that's your only option, definitely do that. Start high in organizations. So it's much easier to work your way down than starting with the junior scientists and have them try and march it up the chain. The other important thing here is to be extremely organized. So I haven't said this yet, but partnerships can be extremely slow. So it often will take a year or 2 years or more from the first interaction to actually getting a partnership signed. So you have to be organized and you have to have some kind of CRM system to track these conversations. It maybe end up being hundreds of meetings that you have before you actually get to a deal. So in this, maybe you'll talk to someone in January and they're asking very poignant questions about a specific area they're concerned about. And then if you come back in May, you probably will have forgotten that conversation completely. But if you can say, hey, you had this concern about our data here, we now have this new data, that's going to be much more powerful to them. So be very, very organized. And then the other thing is to build relationships early, even before you're, ready to partner. This doesn't mean that you necessarily are running a, full-fledged partnership process, but it takes time to get those right introductions. Even if it's in a more kind of social, casual setting, knowing who the right people in the organization to talk to will save you a bunch of time in actually getting the partnerships signed. All right. So if all that goes well, you'll move into this dating phase. Here, there's kind of it varies quite a bit by company and how motivated they are to sign a partnership. But really, the high level concept is that you have these kind of escalating meetings where you'll start with a non-con intro, where you'll go through your boilerplate company introduction deck that you all probably have memorized by heart. And then, you'll get a CDA in place. They'll bring in a bunch of people. You'll shift around a bunch. And yeah, eventually you'll start to meet the right people and they'll expand it to IP, which is a very good signal, or other, R&D functions that might be involved, might be diligencing, let's say CMC or something like that. So lots of things to watch out for in the staging phase. But, I think one thing at the beginning is a lot of pharma companies have to kind of search and eval people whose full-time job is to just make landscapes and yeah, to not actually be targeted in terms of the partnerships they're working on. So definitely, it's hard to feel out whether you're talking to someone that's actually genuinely interested, but really try and understand and make sure that it's a two-way conversation to ask them, what they're looking for in a partner. And there, will often become clear if they're really just kind of fishing around as opposed to actually interested in doing a partnership. Um, other important thing, especially as you get more serious, is to use your network to be able to do diligence on the groups that you're talking to, as well as to kind of get a roadmap internally for whatever the company is that you're partnering with, what their process is, who the final actual decision maker is, yeah, to be able to navigate and know who you have to ultimately win over to get the deal signed. So, checking the news of other partnerships that might be similar that they've done in the past and trying to reach out to those founders or executives at those companies to try and get insider information about the partner and how they are to work with. Um, all right. So after that, you start to actually go into the meat and potatoes of actually getting a contract in place. I won't go through, each of these and the pros and cons and but in short, there's a spectrum of things from, a material transfer agreement to, a joint venture in terms of a level of engagement and, how you're involved. And there's, it truly is a spectrum where there's variations and tweaks on all of these. So yeah, you'll need to think about, your specific situation to figure out what makes the most sense. But I think one thing that really has been valuable for me in doing partnerships is to make sure that you have a clear opinion about what the options are for partnering, and that you're not just going in and having them anchor around what kind of partnership deal that they would want. You might think that, imagine most of the people on this call are from smaller companies, that you're kind of the junior partner. And so you should let them steer and drive the kind of partnership structure. But often these pharma companies are quite complex and the decision making is you might have 50 different people that have opinions about how they should be partnering. And so if you as the partner are going in with a clear, framework of how you want to partner and are saying, hey, this needs to be a co deal, or this, we're looking for a research collaboration with an option, that'll help often accelerate things on their end and get alignment on their end. Yeah, to avoid some of the just chaos that many of these larger pharma companies can have. So after you are having some kind of high-level alignment, you'll start to move into more serious stages of negotiation. So often this starts with just verbal and slides, like I mentioned. You might say, hey, this is the type of deal that we're looking for. That'll move to a term sheet. Term sheets are extremely powerful tools. Often people will emphasize that, oh, many term sheets aren't binding, and it's just kind of a preamble to the contract. But it is so much easier to hash out even before the term sheet, but especially in the term sheet stage, many of the really sticky issues that you might encounter. I encourage you that, yeah, if there's something that you think is going to be a hangup, do not, put it off to the contracting phase because it's going to be much, much harder and much, much longer to figure things out there where you have, lawyers that are writing pages to, outline this concept versus really seeing what the four corners of the agreement are, what the scaffold of the agreement is in this term sheet, which is often, one or two pages of very, very high level, terms as the name indicates. Contracting, this is often where things can really start to slow down. These documents can become extremely complex, often 100+ pages or many hundreds of pages, depending on the complexity of the deal. I think an important thing here is to make sure that you continue to have multiple touch points beyond just the lawyers or the BD people. I think a big mistake is to, a lot of people are involved, kind of in these first two stages, and then you go to contracting and you say that's the lawyer's job, let them run with it. If you only have, and sorry if there's lawyers on the call, if you only have lawyers trying to figure out a deal, you will never do any deal. There's always risk. There's always things that you need to make compromises on. So make sure that you're, continuing to really outline, yeah, what are the core things that you need to get done and what are the compromises that you're willing to make. And then finally you sign and are able to kick off the deal. And here, just my advice is to be paranoid until you actually get the check in the bank. All right. Lots of different hangups. I'll kind of leave this and we can talk about specifics in the questions. But big thing is, that I think often gets overlooked, especially for smaller companies, is don't forget about information rights, whether it's access to information or disclosure information. Many of the reasons you're probably doing this deal is because you think it's going to help you to fundraise or to show data that you're making progress. And so it's very, very easy in contracts to overlook that and to then have very little ability, or it's very cumbersome when you have to ask permission to disclose this to investors, even if you're making really good progress. So that would be one small tip, is to not forget about that. Negotiating, there's lots of different strategies and opinions on how to negotiate. This is my perspective, and definitely others have different strategies, but generally, I think it's important to remain collaborative and not try and be too, savvy or creative. Like you're not on Succession, you're not trying to do some, crazy deal where you're playing games in the background, but just be straightforward and tell the partner what you need, what your priorities are. And I think that is much, much more productive in my experience than trying to play games. Few things that really have been super important for me. One is having a passionate internal champion at the counterparty company that is going to fight for your deal as there's hangups. That's actually going to go and negotiate and push for it internally. Obviously, competitive tension, again, just like fundraising, is super important. I think I have more details on that on the next slide. Number three is to pick your battles. It's way too easy. Again, these contracts are enormous, and it's very easy to get caught up in every single line and just have the entire document be redlined. But really is important to focus on what's important to you and to be willing to compromise on things that are not core and not critical. Don't just fight for things just because you feel like you need to. And then when you are pushing back, I think it's very important to be consistent. So if you said something at the term sheet stage that was important to you, changing things 180 degrees when you're contracting is probably not a good idea, even if it isn't binding. And very simply provide the logic and rationale for whatever your position is, right? So if you're asking for a particular term, say if you want let's say 10% royalties or something. Explain why that makes sense from a comp perspective or from your investor's perspective or from your fundraising perspective, but provide the rationale and logic for why you want things. Because often there are very different cultures between these small companies and these big companies, and they might not be thinking about the same thing as you are, especially when it comes to, fundraising and what your priorities might be. Um, so be collaborative is the short of it. But the number one thing that's going to get you the best terms is competitive tension. So this is where it's important again that you're dating multiple groups simultaneously. That's kind of the classic version of competitive tension. But there can be other versions of it. It doesn't just have to be two term sheets or something that are being passed back and forth simultaneously. So I think it really is about creating kind of scarcity for your company. So many of you, again, are probably from smaller companies, and you might have, limited ability to, prosecute partnerships just from a scale and, how fast you could hire, how many programs you can actually prosecute. You might have, limited programs that you actually have to partner. And even if there's not a competitive bidder that, you just don't have the ability to partner it because you need more, internal core programs. And then capital can also be a source of scarcity where, if you have a venture round, that may make it so that you can offset and don't actually need the upfronts or be able to do partnerships. And so that's also an important way that you can create kind of walk leverage for partnering. But competitive tension is very, very important. Going back to the previous slide, don't I there's different advice on this, but I would avoid, just completely making up other counterparties out of whole cloth. I think most groups can smell this and can see it. And yeah, if you in that situation, then they start to really question just the alignment and the honesty between the groups. So my advice is to find other kind of more creative sources of scarcity than just creating up kind of inventing a counterparty that yeah, might not exist or might be at a very, very early stage in the conversation. After signing, and I'll breeze through this, but I think, again, it all comes down to the people. Have face-to-face meetings. If things go wrong, just fess up to it and tell them, try and tell them well in advance, and just continue to build that trust and rapport, yeah, as much as possible. Again, lots of different cultures for companies that you work with. The companies I listed at the beginning that we've done partnerships with, Vertex, Bayer, and Regeneron, all have their own distinct kind of processes and ways that they like to do things. So be sensitive to that. Make sure that you're getting to know their culture while also making sure that you're clear about why you do things the way that you do, and not just completely adapting to mirror what they're doing. All right, so I think this is the last slide, but few kind of key points to just hammer home before we dive into questions. One, the people are the most important thing. Contracts are there as a fail-safe for mostly when things go wrong. But really what matters is the relationships and the people. And I know that sounds a little kind of hippy-dippy, but it really is true. Internal alignment is super important. So make sure you know what you're giving up. Make sure you really have taken that strategic side and aligned everyone that is relevant within your organization about why you're partnering and what you're partnering. Use competitive tension. We talked a little bit about that. It's very hard to, whether it's competitive tension or scarcity, it's very hard to have momentum and have these deals close quickly if you don't have it. And then really just continue to think long term and don't just think about the upfront and the press release, but how this is ultimately hopefully going to lead to drugs that will create not only benefit for patients but revenue for both you and the partner. That ultimately is where the real value is generated from these. All right, cool. So went through a number of different topics, but with that, we can switch over to Q&A. And I think we have some questions that people submitted previously, but yeah, happy to take questions live as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we have definitely a lot of questions and also seeing the chat already, people asking a bunch of questions. So yeah, really, really great to see engagement and people being curious. I'm gonna do two questions that have been to us pre-submitted that sort of really high level questions, I think good to answer. And after that, I think what we do is open the floor to the people, and then yeah, audience or guests can just raise their hands. I unmute them, and then they can ask their questions directly. Um, cool. I'm just gonna remove. Okay. First question I have was, when is the right time to start partnership conversations, and how do you avoid approaching too early or too late?
Yeah, my advice is definitely to build the relationships early. You don't want to go out and run a full-throated process where you're taking meetings and distracting the organization until you actually have something to partner. But just establishing those relationships casually and making sure you know the organizations and you know the ways into the organizations, I think is the key. But often people if you're gonna err one way or another, I think it's better to err too early than too late, where you're just gonna have to catch up.
Good. Then another one we had, pull my screen over. Can you realistically use partnerships to fund pre-seed stage de-risking work? And yeah, what are the risks here, especially at such an early stage?
Yeah. So one big thing, especially if it's kind of an earlier technology, is on IP. And this is where a lot of the negotiation and hairiness can get in contracts. But if your technology is quite nascent and you're developing it with a partner and it hasn't been clearly defined in the contract about who owns the rights to the core technology, you can end up having the partner have unintended reach in to your core intellectual property that may constrain you from going after other programs subsequently. So IP would be the big thing to watch out for. Obviously, there's challenges as well where if you are a 10-person organization and eight of the people are working on a partnership that it's kind of hard to build your own business and strategy. You are behaving a little bit like a CRO at that point. But to me, IP is probably the biggest one. Yeah, to watch out for very, very early stage companies.
Cool. Yeah, I think would be good if people just, if they have questions, raise your hand, and then I'll unmute them. After that, I'll try to also get to the chat, but not sure if we're gonna have enough time. But we'll prioritize hand raises first. Tobias.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas, first of all, for this chat. I think it's really great to hear from you. My question is, how did you manage the balance between keeping the vision of your product and adapting it to the partner?
Yeah, I think this maybe goes to the kind of internal alignment is what you're willing to shift and change, and yeah, what really is core to your business. So there are many companies, especially in this environment, are partnering just because they have to, right? It's like in case of emergency, break glass situation. Um, and that I think is where you really do run into challenges of yeah, just eroding your core programs or core values or what you're working on. So um, I guess the key advice, yeah, to make it succinct is to just be clear about what that core vision is, and it's going to be harder for you to have it, yeah, eroded slowly if you understand that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Next one, Timorazi.
Thank you for the great presentation. My question is regarding during the partnership. So you agree to a certain product, but then you develop something maybe greater. What do you do with that? Like something that you developed during the partnership that wasn't expected?
Yeah. So that's definitely, again, it goes back to the IP, and I see some questions about IP in the chat as well. But I think a lot of it you should be careful about in the contract identifying, yeah, and clarifying those situations in particular. So if yeah, you are make some discovery that is outside of the core licensed product, who owns that? Who has the right to commercialize it? Often it ends up being joint IP if they're funding it, which can be quite challenging. It's in kind of a no man's land. So making sure even for joint IP that like both parties would have the ability to use it non-exclusively or something like that. So it all gets, yeah, quite detailed in terms of how to do it, but the contract that should be specified. It's definitely a good call out, especially if you're an earlier technology company and you don't know, exactly where the technology is going to go or where it's going to be, a good fit. The other thing is to make sure that if it's a, reimbursement-based payments that you're getting, that you're very careful about coding things that are, internal research versus for the partner, to again avoid having potential reach in that you didn't intend.
Cool. Next on the list, Irini. 1 second. Yeah.
Hi everyone, very nice to meet you. Thank you for the presentation. So my question has to do a bit with, let's say, the evolution of partnerships and what BD people from big pharma look to as the current micro environment has changed financially. Because of course, companies like Eli Lilly sit on more money now, but to your point, there's like less funding from investors. I would just imagine that there's way more competition. So I'm wondering if you have seen a change in terms of the market size, the stage of the asset, or other such parameters between like 2022 and like to now. Yeah, I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So definitely the ball, just as with investors, has shifted in terms of it depends a lot on the company. Maybe I'll start there. The partnering company, the pharma company, or larger company, some of them are looking for things that are going to pay off in 10 years. Many of them, don't have the forethought or multi-decade planning, where they're looking for things immediately because their pipeline is in jeopardy, and so they need something that's phase 2 or later that can in pretty short order start to generate revenue that they can have affect their bottom line. So a lot of it depends on the partner, and you can see this from just if you do analysis on the different companies, you can see kind of what their partnering strategy is. Is it more of this kind of, oh crap, we are going to have a drop in our revenue and we need to figure out a way to plug that gap, or is it more of this early partnerships that we think are going to develop over the course of a decade and develop longer term? Because the funding environment, because there's been, back in 2021, in the COVID times, there was this kind of boom of partner program or partner companies, not partner, platform companies. I think there is a bit of a glut of platforms that partners can select. And so that does make it more challenging to do these platform type deals than if you have a clear asset that you're offering and trying to partner. So just high level thoughts. Could go, for a long time answering that, but hopefully that helps.
Next one from Angelica. Angelica, yeah.
Hey, sorry about that. Took me a minute to unmute. I was curious if you could talk about what your IP diligence process was like with the pharma partner, particularly them doing diligence on you. And then related to that, how much capital you suggest reserving for these, what are typically quite long months to up to a year negotiation processes?
Yeah. So the second part, it's definitely not cheap. I don't know if I can give specifics about how much we spend on things, but it can be quite expensive, especially when you talk about IP diligence and kind of just doing FTO analyses and things like that. So make sure you have reserves. It's hard to say without talking about kind of specific examples, but it can get expensive. Then the first question is kind of what the IP process was like. It varies again quite a bit depending on company by company. Some are quite focused on the intellectual property, and Mammoth, of course, is very focused on CRISPR technology, which is kind of synonymous with complex IP and IP challenges. So as you can imagine, we definitely had some pretty intensive IP diligence that we went through. But it's usually not. I would say usually your internal IP diligence is going to be more uh, scrutinous, or maybe not diligence, but internal IP rigor is going to be more scrutinous than the partner, because your business, your entire business depends on this asset. So um, I would just make sure you're on top of it before you go into IP diligence. Like I mentioned, really being ahead of third-party monitoring, so searching for other patents that might be relevant, and doing very clear FTO analyses if something comes up that you have some stated opinion about why it does or doesn't infringe. But yeah, I think what you really don't want to happen in IP diligence, kind of the doomsday scenario, is that they come up with something that you've never seen before. You can scramble and try and come up with some excuse, but it's obviously much, much better if you are on top of your own internal IP work before, yeah, irregardless of the partnering.
Well, have Angelica next in line.
I think Angelica just
Oh,
went.
sorry, you should have raised the hand. That's right. Then it's David.
Yeah, hello. Thank you again for your presentation. I have two questions. One, we're a platform that solves a lot of problems that numerous large pharma has had and have paused clinical trials in various indications. Is it entirely appropriate to partner with one large pharma in a certain indication and somebody else in a completely different indication?
Uh,
And secondly was, if the focus is initially, trying to go as high as possible in the organization, should that focus be in BD or in science? The initial focus anyway.
Yeah, it can be either. I mean, often so starting with the second question, often it depends on the pharma company, but many of the most senior people are going to be more on the technology side than science or technology side than on the BD side. But it can be either. It really should just be what's the most senior person that can steer you into the right direction. Wherever you start, it's going to go to some technical team to diligence and evaluate and dig in on what you're doing. Yeah, so I would just do whatever you can to find a high level intro. Yeah, and then have them steer you to the right person. It may even be one of their peers. It may be a legal person, and they say, oh, you need to talk to the head of this BD team that we have. So they can direct you to the right person. To the first question, I think to make it kind of more general, I think it kind of comes down to exclusivity and field of use, and it really depends on the specifics of the technology. But yeah, in your case, it may make sense to not, if it's saving programs that pharma companies have, and everyone obviously has very distinct programs, it probably makes sense to try and parse it out to whatever is relevant and whatever you actually think they're going to use versus doing some blanket deal. But yeah, definitely that's another common hang up is exclusivity and yeah, how much they can one of the big challenges with partnerships is that you don't want someone to take something that they're not going to use. That ultimately, even if it has an upfront, doesn't actually generate that much value for you in the long term. So yeah, really, again, focus on partners that are giving you signals that they actually want to develop and use it for something. And hopefully you get some downstream profit sharing of that.
Have Alice next in line.
Hi guys, thank you so much for your talk, Lucas. Really awesome. I'm just curious, maybe you could comment on target discovery partnerships in particular, how to structure it. We have essentially like a proprietary real world data set with archival tissue that we think would be attractive to farmers, specifically for looking at ADC resistance. And looking at the mechanisms of resistance. And so it would be more about target discovery. And so we currently have a proposal in the pipeline, but just trying to game plan what would be the best way to approach the next pharma and the next.
Yeah. And to be clear, you have like one target that you think would be applicable to multiple pharmas, or you know how to do successive partnerships with different targets.
We'd want to do successive partnerships with different targets.
Okay, yeah. Um, I mean, I think the big thing there, so target discovery, if I'm honest, I think target discovery partnerships are often challenging because the pharma is taking on a lot of risk. Like there's usually not a tremendous amount of like whether it's preclinical or clinical data that they can say, okay, this is actually a good target. So you may end up backloading things, more than you would in a deal that's maybe more mature, where you might, take a haircut on the upfront, but you're trying to get more royalties if it does work out. Um, yeah. So that's one kind of high level thought. I think the other thing is, you know, as you do the first one, I think there will probably be a kind of you might be tempted to treat it as a little bit of a loss leader and say, oh, if we get this pharma, like, we'll it'll be easier to get the next one and the next one. Um, I would definitely be cautious about that if this is really your core business. It may be necessary, but yeah, I would definitely think about this as being kind of anchoring the structure and the kind of deal and the four corners of the deal that will probably get carried over to subsequent deals because they'll ask, oh, how did you do it with this company? And yeah, you'll need to give them some kind of straight answer, even if there's like some incremental increase in the economics. So be careful about anchoring with the first deal. Yeah, and just kind of recognize the risk that the farm is taking with a target discovery deal and make sure that the contract kind of reflects that.
Cool. Do we have time for one more question, Lucas, or what does your
Sure. Yeah, I can do one more.
you do one more? I have Rokip, the next one, last one.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. Quick question. Capital is a leverage for your partnership. So how do you like balance between capital and market signal? Because, sometimes market signal brings capital. So it's like, what's the balance? Especially, how do you do that on early or mid stage? So balance between capital and market signal.
Yeah. If I understand the question, yeah, I think you're saying like they're all tied together. Like if you have capital, you don't need the partnership. If you have the partnership, you probably get capital. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really just to make sure that, that you at your company or your executive team is pursuing, multiple avenues, whether it's multiple partnerships or, fundraising and partnering at the same time, to, yeah, kind of create those opportunities. Because it's much of this is a numbers game. And, just like for VCs, you're going to talk to a lot of VCs and you might get lucky that'll be easier than partnering. It's hard to predict a priori which you should start with. But yeah, kind of pursuing and understanding the market for both at the same time, I think is probably the best way forward.
Cool. So yeah, thank you all for joining. As I said, I recorded that seminar and then I'll send it out by email as well, and YouTube link, and feel free to share this with friends, other people in your network, and other founders. And yeah, thanks all for the amazing questions from everyone.
Yep. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.